Welcome to another episode of the Above the Business podcast. My name is Bradley Hammond, your host. On today's episode, we have Blake Allison. He is the founder and CEO of LifeCents, a leading financial wellness company. Now, we love to talk around business financials. Obviously, Club Capital helps small business owners with that specifically, but we haven't really spent as much time on the personal finance side. And I really was interested and intrigued by this concept of personal wellness. And so if you're one who, you're bringing in a lot of revenue from your business and a lot of profit from your business, you're doing well, but maybe you're not where you really want to be on the personal finance side, this episode is for you. Without further ado, here's my conversation with Blake Allison. Blake, welcome to the Above the Business podcast.
Hey, Bradley. Thanks for having me.
Excited to have you. Love to start with background and origin story. How did people get to where they are today? I mean, I think most of our podcasts that we've had over the years, we probably could just ask that one question and then riff off of it for 30, 45 minutes or so, just that alone. So why don't you take our listening audience back wherever you feel is appropriate and bring us to present day?
Yeah, sure. So, just starting in the present day just a little bit. So I have a financial wellness, health and wellness business, and that's kind of a data point that will make sense of everything else. So, I've always had a penchant for personal finance. Just really, I've always been interested in it. Back in the day, if you can imagine, I had an Apple IIe computer, if that even rings a bell for you, I don't know. But there was this little stock trading game on there that was just little bar charts and didn't know what I was doing, but very fond memories of that. My grandfather, the memories I have, I always remember him reading the Wall Street Journal. Didn't know what that was, but kind of memories stuck with me. But then you contrast that with my upbringing, where my parents divorced when I was very young, so I was raised for a while by my mom with her, I have a brother and sister, so a teacher's salary, three kids, was kind of a tough thing back in the day, and I'm sure it still is, no doubt. But she really showed me what was possible with what you have and what you don't have, and what's important and what's not important. She did remarry, but even when she remarried, my stepfather, who he himself later became an entrepreneur. He he started out, as entrepreneurs know, it's you don't start off making the money you want to make. So we even after she remarried, we still lived a very frugal life, and so that really imprinted on me what was important, and how to manage life with limited resources. You fast forward after college. I studied finance in college. It was investment finance, corporate finance, not personal finance, but I still had this penchant for personal finance. And that led me to, I actually had several, over the years, had several job offers with wealth management firms and financial advisors, et cetera. And my question to them when I learned more about the responsibilities, I was always like, well, where is the advising? It just sounds like it's a sales position. And so I'm like, well, this is not what I want to do. I want to help people. I want to advise them. I want to guide them, not just go get assets under management. And that's just me, I have a different spin. But I did get into consulting, and I did a lot of consulting with financial services companies. And there were a couple of opportunities that allowed me to live abroad. I lived both in Munich, Germany, and Istanbul, Turkey. And working with financial services companies there, I think it was absolutely fascinating. Especially in Turkey, you have a country whose culture goes back, history goes back hundreds of years, if not millennia, and very steeped in tradition. These banks and other financial services companies were interested in modernizing their financial services markets, but there are limitations, like it's a Muslim country, so you have Sharia law, and so how do you bring modern products to market, like a mortgage that requires you to charge interest when you can't charge interest under Sharia law? And so it was a fascinating opportunity to help develop new products, bring them to market with these constraints. But then what we discovered, Bradley, is that even with and there was a lot of innovation globally. So this was, I think 2004 to 2007, just before the world economy blew up. But there was such innovation, but consumers' baseline knowledge never changed. So there was all this innovation in products and services, not just in Turkey, but around the world. But consumers' baseline knowledge never changed. And so I was like, well, what's happening here? It's like, why all these products that are being brought, being created with, supposedly with the intention of helping people, we're not helping people the way everyone thought. And that's because I think people's financial education and financial literacy was lacking. And so I think that was combine that with my upbringing and my interest in personal finance. I think that was the catalyst, along with an entrepreneurial spirit that I've had forever. I mean, I had a couple businesses in high school and college just on the side, painting house numbers on curbs. I grew up in Virginia Beach, Virginia. And I discovered that there was a city ordinance that required people to have their house numbers visibly painted on the curb, so emergency vehicles, fire trucks, ambulances, police cars could easily identify, the house and number. And so my friend and I went door to door, and I mean, we had a close rate essentially of 100%. It was probably the worst thing that could happen from an entrepreneur's viewpoint, is you get this false sense of success. Although it was a great business, and this was summers during high school and college, and so it was pretty cool. So I've had the entrepreneurial spirit, and then some pretty cool experiences professionally, and then I decided that I need to solve this problem and created the business that I have today.
How much do you think financial literacy, which I would love for you to, this is a two-part question, but I'd love for you to maybe define, what does financial literacy even mean? One. Two, how much is success with our financials, whether it's business financials and running a profitable business, but then also our personal financials? How much of it is nuts and bolts, hard skills, structure, just skills, and how much of it is mindset?
Oh, great question, man. That's like the $1 million question. It's kind of funny too, because before starting my business, I thought I would take all this knowledge, the experiences, and put it into a book. So I actually intended to write a book originally, something akin to the mindset for wealth, as you just described, because I do think that mindset is, people are more than numbers, and when we look at our personal finances and getting on track, I mean, so much of it is behavioral. So we all know, I think, to spend less and save more, just like we know to eat less and walk more. So kind of pretty fundamental rules of thumb that we all could and should live by, that would make our lives a lot easier, but we don't do it. And I don't think, and I think it's interesting too, because if there's a side of this business, it's helping, various underserved communities, maybe low to moderate income communities is one end of the spectrum, and then you have the affluent. But a lot of times there is a ill-conceived notion that people who are without means, economic means, need help with learning how to budget and saving money. And I'm like, oh no, they are by far the best stewards over the money. They know exactly where every penny is going. And so I think that realistically, people know what they need to know to be responsible with their money. But what we're not good with are behaviors and that mindset, where there are so many things that can distract us from reaching our goals, our financial goals. And is it, I've had a bad day at work, and I want to go out and just have dinner and a couple of drinks, and that's not part of my plan. Or hey, this is a once in a year vacation. Let's just go all out. I mean, there's just an infinite number of examples, but I think people certainly have this, most people have the skills and the knowledge and the tools in their toolkit to manage their money well. We just do what humans do when we don't act rationally. So there is, economics is people make rational decisions, and there's a whole discipline called behavioral finance, behavioral economics, which is people do not act rationally, and that is absolutely true. And so that's what we're
Yep.
fighting is human nature.
Okay. So, especially when it comes to business financials and the management of that, but then also I think it applies effectively in, let's just say, in personal finance around like creating budgets as an example. It's helpful to have benchmarking of like, well, what's normal, right? What do people normally do? What should my mortgage be as a percentage of how much I bring home? Things of that nature. That becomes helpful. It becomes helpful. So I'm asking this question, which is somewhat around the question I just asked previously, but I think it's a different version of it. How much do you really help people in, or how much do you spend the time, I should say, the bulk of your time in helping put together a plan in place for someone versus helping someone have adherence to the plan?
Hmm. Yeah, another another great question. So you've got to get through one to get to the other, right? So first of all, I think the first thing that needs to happen is people have to have a mindset that this is important to them. Otherwise, people will kick the can down the road. Be like, yeah, yeah, I know, I need to save for retirement, or I need to pay down debt. Yeah, I know it, I know it, I know it. I think it's actually people taking action is the hard part, but a lot of that comes down to the awareness of the need. So does something happen that just like a physical, I think physical health is such a great proxy. It's like, yep, I know I should eat better. I know I should exercise. And then I have, a coronary event, or, I'm in the hospital for something. And I'm like, oh, this is now real.
Yeah.
So does it take something like that to get people to want to commit, to have the awareness of what they need to do, and then have the willingness to commit. And then to answer your question, getting the plan tends to be the easier part. Again, it's it's let's create a budget, set spending limits based on these categories, and that's it. Now, going back to your question of getting people to stick to it is just that is always the challenge.
Yeah.
And I think given the audience here, and I'm delighted to talk to fellow entrepreneurs. One of the things that we do have to take in consideration that very often with smaller businesses, we're relying on personal credit, we're relying on, are we taking out home equity lines of credit against our homes as, seed capital, things like that. So I think I think it's imperative that we as entrepreneurs have the knowledge and the skills to make sure we understand how to put budgets together. And I think we do. I think people just need to do it. And then it's ever more important for us to adhere to those budgets, because not only is our personal finances at risk, but our business finances as well.
I've you used two words there that I was actually going to ask you about, because I will spend a little bit of time. Uh, this will be a good example. We'll talk about it in a minute. Like I went to a Starbucks and bought my $5 Starbucks. Okay. So, and I actually thought about it as I was about to get ready for this podcast, but I was like, well, whatever.
I'll ring
Anyway,
my shame bell. No, that's the whole
yeah,
thing.
yeah,
We'll
yeah.
come
No,
to
but we'll come to that in just a second around behaviors and choices. But I wanted to get to really probably one of the biggest ones, and you just used two words there, and it's needs and wants. Okay. And so how do you get because I can imagine someone listening to this podcast, Blake, whether they're a small business owner, and then they're also just as a small business owner, they can also apply it to their personal finances as well. I think this is really important, is because there's this underlying assumption that just because they're a business owner, that all of a sudden that everybody's got their personal finances all intact. Not true at all. Okay. Okay. So, um, uh, how do you help people make the shift from, yeah, I do need to do that. I do need a budget. I do need it to be on top of my spending. He's right. He's right. Well, I probably didn't need to buy this coffee for the caloric intake in and of itself is 110 calories. Probably would have been better for my macros today if I had not drank that, had bought that coffee. You know what though, Blake? I don't care. I wanted
Yeah.
it. I wanted it. And so um, I'm using that just as a like a obviously a joking example, but I think it is one where how do you help people get to a place where they say, I want this. I want to be on top of my financials? Because if we have the desire to want to be on top of it, want to be on top of it, then the feeling that that gives me, I'll go through the pain that it takes to go through the building of the budgets and the adherence of the budget and having to look at the numbers and all those kind of things. But if it just sits in a need to bucket, I don't know if I'm ever going to get there. What are your
That's right.
thoughts?
Yeah, so let's look at New Year's resolutions, right? So January 1st, after everyone kind of gets the cobwebs out of their heads, from the night before, they're like, new year, new me, and I'm gonna do all these things, whether it's I'm gonna exercise more, I'm gonna eat better, I'm gonna, be better with my money. What is it? Within 6 weeks, something like 90% of all New Year's resolutions go by the wayside. So it's the same issue. And I think part of it is people, you brought up a great point, which is, how, earlier in the conversation, like, how am I doing? Is this percentage of my, income going to a housing payment the right amount? Just how am I doing? Answering that question. So I think that's what we try and do, is to give people a perspective of how they're doing, to be like, hey, I think what people realize is they're not alone. If you look at social media, you're going to get a different people will get a different have a different opinion about that, because it looks like on social media that everyone's a millionaire, everyone's living their best life, and I'm the only person that's not driving around in a $200,000 sports car, and I don't have the mansion on the water, in whatever state you choose. And I think that is doing a disservice, because that's just not reality. That's not most people, and that's okay. Um, and so I think if when people understand, it's like, okay, I'm not alone in this. I'm not the only person that is behind on feels like they're behind on savings or has too much debt. That's a good starting point. But I think when you start baking in more realistic expectations, just like New Year's resolutions, are people gonna go to the gym? Go from being a couch potato to going to the gym 4 or 5 times a week? Probably not, and that's why people fail. That's why those resolutions fail. So, are we going to go from not having, even an emergency fund, to being a millionaire in a couple of years? Probably not. So
Hmm.
let's just pause, and let's just same kind of thing. Let's just pick one thing. Just pick one thing. Are you going to pay down one credit card? Are you going to save an extra, X dollars per month? And I don't want to use an actual number, because I could say $100, and that could be a lot to some people and very little to others. But it's like,
Yeah.
but pick a number, and just taste the success of that. But I think it's also important to see what that means, because it is often overlooked, and it is probably the most cliche thing. But when people really understand the power of compound interest, it's compelling. I mean, the idea that your money is working for you, it's compelling. And I think if people play with those type, calculators, just like, okay, if I save $100 this month, wait, what if it's 200? What if it? But I think the other thing that is super important is setting a budget and saying, okay, if I save this much every month and I'm keeping my debt in check, I'm going to have a certain, most likely have some money that is um, purely for fun. And I tell people, set your budget based on the goals you want to reach. And if you are saving towards the house, you're saving towards retirement, and you're paying down your debt, and you've got some extra cash over here, blow it on what you want. Blow
Mm.
it. Don't worry about that, because that actually is going to give you, just like you wanted to get that that $5 drink. That's great. What happened, but the problem is when people do that every day and they're not working towards other goals. So it's like I do the drink here, I do this here. I've got the gym membership, this subscription service, that's a subscription service. You're living your best life, but you're not doing anything towards the other. That's where the problem is. And I'm just like, dial it back a little bit. You can do most of those things, but just pick one thing that's going to allow you to make progress on the good side. But
Yeah.
don't feel guilty.
Yeah. So, and I guess, look, I mean, my bend for us here with business owners is that, look, I'm going to think about things and ask these questions kind of around specifically a business owner thought first,
Sure.
because then you've got a business owner who's also is running their his or her personal household as well. Okay. Right. By and large, the business owners probably are doing, like in terms of just overall income levels, are doing, you know, can be doing better than maybe the average. Okay. I would say that's a broad brush comment. But by and large, that said, though, they get lifestyle creep, right? That happens with, you're driving a nicer car. Okay. Is that wrong? No, it's not wrong. And then you buy the vacation home and all these kind of things. And before you know it, then the kids are in private school. And all of a sudden it's like, wow, okay, where did the money go? Even though you're bringing in quite a bit. That being said, I teed all of that up to ask this question, which is, and again, I think this is relevant because you have business owners who have more direct control over one aspect of the equation, which is income. Okay. Like, meaning they can go bring in more revenue, whereas people who are just a W 2, and I don't mean that derogatory in any way, I hope
Right.
nobody takes it that way, but they're not a business owner. They sometimes maybe don't have as direct of an impact to what their income number is unless they're in a sales position. Is this making sense? Okay.
Yeah,
So,
100%.
with that being said, how much oftentimes is the equation of like, hey, you know what? Go make more money. Go make more money versus, and the other equation is we need to cut some of the fat here, right? And sometimes it's like, you know what? We definitely all have some fat that we could trim back. We could come back some of those subscriptions. But at the same time, if you're a business owner, your business is doing $1 million in top line, you're bringing home $300,000, just to use a specific number. 15.99 a month subscription service is not going to move the needle. You could go and make an extra $100,000 possibly in the business. That becomes a lot more of a substantial thing than you cut $120 out of your budget every single year. So how do we reconcile those two? I know that's a really long-winded question, but I wanted to kind of tee that up for you.
Yeah, and it's a it's a reality. I mean, when you are running a business, you have greater control over your income and expenses. I think that the trap is not have, and this is going to sound very basic, but it is overlooked.
Hmm.
If you don't have specific goals, then everything's a moving target. So if you're like, okay, I know that I want to retire when I'm 55, and that's going to take me saving X dollars per month. Again, as long as you are hitting, if you want to buy that second home, if you want to buy the nicer car, fantastic. As long as you are, again, I'm like I'm going to use a very like inappropriate and irresponsible word, but if you have money to blow, good for you, fantastic. But that is based on the fact that you dotted your I's and crossed your T's, and you are taking care of retirement, healthcare. If you have kids that you want to pay for college, that's fine. If you want to send them to private school, that's great. but you cannot, if you have these very specific goals over here, you're not budgeting on that. You're like, okay, well, I wanted to retire when I was 55, but if I want to get the vacation home, I'm going to keep pushing that. If you keep kicking the can down the road, then you're always going to be behind.
Yeah.
But if you're just like, look, I'm going to stick to this. I'm going to retire when I'm 55. I want the retirement home. I want to make sure my kids' colleges, is paid for, et cetera. And you're doing that, and you decide you're going to go make an extra 50, 100K a year in income, and you don't know where that goes at the end of the year. That's not the worst thing. However, I always say, well, maybe your lifestyle could be better when you retire at 55 if you didn't blow, if you make an extra 100K and you're taking care of all your goals. Do you want to blow that 100K, or do you want to put a little bit more towards the retirement so your retirement's a little bit better? Because I think that's also hard for people to get their mind around, which is, you know, um, uh, once your income stops, you don't have that flexibility. You get used to being, like, oh, I'll just go work a little bit harder, make a little bit more income.
That's
But
fair.
once you retire, doesn't happen.
Yeah, that's fair. That's fair. Well, actually, you bring up a really good question. How do you help people to begin to set personal finance goals?
So first and foremost, and our solution is a web-based app where we take people through what we essentially are a primary care physician for financial health. So what we want to do is we want to ask the questions. We want to get to know people, to understand not just their numbers, how much do you have in the bank account, how much do you have in debt, but we need to understand who you are as a person. What are your goals, short-term, long-term? What keeps you up at night? What are your aspirations? Once you have that information, then you can start putting together a plan of care that's going to be appropriate for the individual, because there is nothing about personal finance that can be a one-size-fits-all approach.
Yeah.
So I think that's, fundamentally, you have to treat each person as an individual. And that sounds, again, very like common sense, but I think what we see too often is, kind of, if someone says they have too much debt, treating everyone that says that the same way versus saying, well, what kind of, is that medical debt? Is that debt because you're living beyond your means? Is that debt
Yeah.
because, you don't have a stable income? Those details are what really matter. So I think once you get to know someone, in that regard, in depth, then you can put people on the right pathway.
What are maybe two or three of the biggest things? It can be mistakes or myths that you've seen, or maybe just over the years. I mean, you've got a wealth of knowledge of helping people to be able to get on top of their finances. What are some of the biggest things and lessons that you've learned over the years from people? Some of the common things. I love working with small business owners, and so there's always these things that tend to come up in running a business. And so when you know those, you start to kind of realize, like, hey, you kind of know what's coming. When you hire your first manager in place, like, there's going to be your initial challenges and also opportunities that come with those kind of things in the business. What are some of the things that you've seen?
Yeah, so I think I've kind of talked to this a couple times, the idea of having actual goals. I mean, setting specific targets and having a plan to get there, and putting it on paper, so to speak, whether it's, actual paper, you're using some type of online tool. But I think there's only so much, especially business owners. I think, you have so many things that you have to manage anyway. Just adding one more to be like, oh, I can kind of keep in my mind a running list, and, like, I've got a good idea of what my assets are and how much I'm making. I think until you put it on paper and you kind of map things out and say, and also, like, like, what do you want? What do you want that lifestyle to look like? Until you put that on paper, I mean, I can speak from personal experiences. It's just like, well, I'm looking outside. I'm like, do we want the pool, or do we
Hmm.
want to, do we need a new water filtration system, which sounds crazy, but we're on well water, or do we want, a new SUV? Like, I would love them all. But you've got to prioritize, and it sounds very basic, but I think going back to your observation that it's very easy to be like, oh, I'll just make more money. It doesn't change the fact that you 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 have to be disciplined in reaching those goals. So you've got to set them and be disciplined. And I think the other thing, I think people just tend to kick the can down the road. They're like, I can make up for lost time. I'm going to make more money next year. It's going to be a banner year. But they wind up spending that money on the things, that's, like, oh, banner year, I can buy the vacation home, but they haven't solved the problem of, let's say, getting on track for retirement. And so I think that's the other thing that I see is just like kicking the can down the road and going back to what I said before, people really appreciated, compound interest. They would just be chipping away a little bit more than you might imagine, saving a little bit more than you might imagine because
Yeah.
it's stunning.
So I'm actually looking at, if you come and see me glancing off camera here, because I was curious about this, I pulled up some notes that I have, digital notes of my like goals, like personal finance goals, right? And so not business stuff, but personal finance. So part of it, I'm curious how you help people though, because there's the goal, but then there's the time frame around it, right? And there's all this like, well, I want a $10 million net worth. I'm just going to pull that one out of thin air, right? That seems like a popular one, 8-figure net worth. And it's like, okay, well, I mean, is that what you try to do in the next 12 months? Or is it that the next 35 years? And so then you're like, uh, there's these different trains of thought of the time frame associated to give it. Some people are like, no, I've set a 25-year goal. And then other people are like, no, 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 that's not how you do it. I have my opinions of how you need to do it in business. How do you do it personally with people?
Yeah, well, let's use entrepreneurs as an example because getting to that $10 million net worth. I mean, is that something where you're planning to grow the business by X percentage each year, and you can see a pathway to that? By the way, in doing that, again, this is having a good understanding of how the mechanics of how the finances work. So, what type of free cash flow are you going to have to put away towards that $10 million goal if you're looking to save, or is this something that you're looking for an exit?
Hmm.
Very, very different pathways. So one, you can be like, okay, for the next 15 years, I'm going to get my business to, $1.5 million. I'm surviving on 1 million right now. I can put away an additional $400,000 over the next 10, 15 years. And with, growth, blah, blah, blah. I mean, you've got to be able to execute against that plan. So
Yeah.
again, we have to be realistic. But someone else might say, no, heck no, man, I've been already doing this. I want to exit in 5 years. Well, are you going to be able to drive the valuation that you need for that in 5 years? So can
Yeah.
you grow your business? So I think I would tie those together. For entrepreneurs, that personal goal is probably very, very closely tied to the what someone's doing with the business. Otherwise, it is, for people in general, it's working backwards and saying, okay, all right, let's list all the goals you have, retirement being one, that second home, etc. When do you want that to happen? And then you run numbers against that. Like, okay, well, if I want that house in 3 years, I'm gonna have to save, for a down payment. Can you save for that? Can you save that, $1,000 a month for a down payment for the next 3 years, whatever the number would be? I'm just making up numbers. Are you still going to be able to put the same amount of money away towards your retirement goal?
Mm.
And so it's limited resources. I mean, we just have to realize it's like
Yeah.
we want all these things, but can we do it with the resources? And if you're and it and this is where, going back to your comment, it's like, can you pull that lever of saying, okay, right now, based on my current income, I'm not going to be able to get the investment property in 3 years. It'll have to be five, unless I increase my income by $50,000 a year for the next 3 years, whatever that may
Yeah.
be.
Yeah. Yeah.
So this is just putting pen to paper, and you've just got to be willing. I think the other thing, what people don't do, you have to be willing to put some time in to think through these things and run some scenarios. And
Yeah.
it's not advanced math. It's just saying, if I want to save $100,000 in the next 3 years, how much do I need to put away every month, assuming a 6% interest rate or something like that, just kind of using a general rule of thumb for the stock market right now. What do I have to save if I want to get there in 3 years? What happens if am I still able to contribute the same amount to retirement? That is dependent on me knowing how much I need to save for retirement every month. So I think
Yeah.
people just have to run these numbers. And the other, going back to two or three questions, the other thing mistakes people make is assuming that they can do all this themselves. I mean, I think it absolutely makes sense, especially the more it makes sense to reach out to professionals, whether that's a financial planner or advisor, even a tax consultant or both, because I think there are a lot of ways entrepreneurs can save on taxes. Obviously there are a lot of expenses that we can put through through the business. That's great, but retirement, there are a lot of options for retirement plans as business owners that can really boost retirement, which will get you farther along than you might expect. Again, freeing up additional cash for these other goals. So I think it's just knowing your options, but you know, tap out and bring in help when you need.
Yeah. Yeah. I mean, we get coaching in a lot of different areas. I mean, it's super helpful to have somebody else that you get to a place of confidence that can really speak into it, and when you get it outside of you, to have somebody else to kind of see it from a different perspective, I think is incredibly helpful. I mean, this conversation has had me kind of go back and think through of like, okay, how am I clear? Number one, this is kind of some of my biggest takeaways is am I actually really clear on my goals that I have personally? Interestingly, I'll just tell you, those that have listened to the podcast for a long time, in the business sense, when we're talking about setting business goals, I'm going to use that word because I think it's universal. People can use it, can understand what we mean there. When you set business goals, I actually don't tend to use the word goal. And I like to use things like objective, priorities, targets, critical numbers, et cetera, because for me, like goals, it's just easy to throw around goals because they become synonymous with wishes. That's number one. That said, though, in the sense I'm much more apt to use the word goal when it comes to personal things, right? Like a fitness goal, a personal finance goal. I think it makes, I don't know why it resonates. It's easier for me to use the word goal when I'm talking about like personal things versus in the business. I'd rather use priorities, targets, objectives, key results, etc., versus just everything becomes a goal, so to speak, a vision, what's my 3-year vision, so on and so forth. So anyway, I say that, and it's made me go back and think, okay, am I really clear on what it is, what matters, and then do I really have like a plan in place that I'm executing on? Because you kind of really got to have the first part of like, well, where are we driving to is kind of what I pick up, and I think it's a great reminder for all of us. And then number two, well, what's the plan in place to kind of keep me accountable to make that happen? Am I actually, do I have something that's giving me adherence to those? I think that's fantastic. Well, before we ask you the last question, if people want to work with you and connect with you, where would you point them to, Blake, so that they can get to know you and your team? And how can they connect?
Yeah, I appreciate that. I first and foremost, I would say go to our website, www.lifecents.com. So that's LIFECENTS. And then my email is blake@lifecents.com. And I'd be more than happy to have this conversation, continue this conversation with anyone listening, and just provide any guidance I can, be a resource, and go from there.
What does working above the business mean to you?
Yeah. So couple things come to mind is I'm very motivated by the work that I do, the kind of work that I'm doing, and the opportunity. Even here today, I appreciate the opportunity to hopefully spark some thoughts for people. But I really believe in helping people um, become better stewards of their finances so they can reach those personal goals and those business targets. I'm going to steal that, Bradley. I think targets is a much better expression for the business side, but they are, especially for entrepreneurs, they are tied together. And I just so for me, helping entrepreneurs achieve their vision, achieve their dream, and in part by addressing the building block of personal finances and their overall financial picture is to me kind of what drives me above the business.
Yeah, I love that. I love that you can really feel that you're very much mission driven and purpose driven in what it is that you do. I already shared obviously a couple of my big takeaways from today. There are a couple other ones. Comment you made: people are more than numbers. I love that. That was actually really great. So the second one is just a good reminder: you're not alone. You're not alone. And when people are throwing out, I mean, not even the Lambos and the private jets. That's an extreme version of it. I think that a lot of times we can see other people, our friends, that are maybe just taking a nice lavish vacation and then they seem to take another one. And you're like, where in the world did this come from? And you don't often know the full story behind that. So just know you're not alone. So I love that. Blake, appreciate you coming on the pod.
Thanks, brother, so much.
Want to give a shout out to our podcast sponsor. This is obviously a great one for Club Capital. So if you're a small business owner, you want to get on top of your financials so you can bring home more money to your family, book a no obligation demo with Club Capital. One of the best investments you can make is in your own development and the development of your team. You can get both, which is unique with Coach B. Go to coachpconsulting.com, coachpconsulting.com. If you're an insurance agency owner and you're wanting to level up your skills, knowledge, mindset, get around other like-minded business owners to help you learn the actual skills of running a successful insurance agency, Coach B can help you. Go to coachpconsulting.com. I talk about tools a lot, comes up. One of the tools that can really help you is Today App. Go to todayappro.com. It will obviously sync with your corporate approved CRM. It's beautiful, easy to use. Your team will love it, and I know you will too. Go to todayappro.com, todayappro.com. I thought that was a really good episode. All right, everyone. Till next week, lead well and go be great.